What is up, Team Eternal? Welcome to another EPL Eternal Logos podcast. We're back live in the studio. It is 2026. We're kicking off the festivities. We're kicking off the year right. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. We love you. We got a really cool special guest in the house. Been trying to get this in the works for a little bit. So we finally made it happen. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode. Of course, make sure liking and subscription, of course, is optional. And commenting is mandatory, like we always say. So we're excited about what's about to happen. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks, man.
This
Good
is
to
my
be here.
guy, man. This is my guy, Zach. He is... how did we meet? We met through my lady, Caroline.
Yes, through your lady.
How long ago was that? Do you remember? How long ago?
I want to say we met at a jam session in your old apartment, in Caroline's old apartment.
Yeah, that's
you were on the
right.
pianos,
Yeah,
and
that's exactly right. That's
I
exactly
just
right.
followed the music. I was in the parking lot. I was like, oh no, I hear some seventh chords. And I think I'm gonna go in there.
If you know, you know. Seventh course.
Yeah.
Zach, I'll of course give him a chance to introduce himself and such, but you know he does music and some other things, and like you said, it was kind of a jam session. If you didn't know, I dabble in music. You know, I call myself a musician. I call myself a piano player. So if you didn't know that, that's good information. You learn something every day. But no, thank you for coming, man. I know it's a bit of a drive, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. From what I understand, Zach is an intellectual. Caroline told me you use a lot of big words.
Do I?
So I'm excited.
I like syllables. I like long, multisyllabic words if possible. Yeah.
Man, like I said, the podcast is dedicated to helping people understand and teaching people critical thinking. Everybody who's tuned into the podcast knows this, you know, so that's one of the things that hopefully we'll get into a little bit. We'll talk. If we need to sit down and wait and explain terms or define things, we can do that. But like I said, I'm excited. So we won't spend too much time deliberating. But thank you guys again for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. We're going to try to make this really entertaining for you guys. Me and Zach have talked a little bit behind the scenes. Of course, he's going to introduce the topic a bit. And then I'm going to also give him a chance to introduce himself. And then we'll flip. I'm not going to forget this time. We're going to flip the hourglass on time. All right. So introduce yourself. Tell us your worldview. And, of course, plug any social media you have. And then rock.
Cool. My name is Zach Alexzander. So my father was born
in the first year.
So my 23andMe said, I'm trying to see the thing about if I take this in reverse order, my social media is all revolving around my music.
Yeah.
And so on Instagram, I'm Zach Alexzander Music. Facebook, just Zach Alexzander. Don't check out my TikTok, please.
That's an invitation.
Yeah. There you go. That's but I studied religious studies and philosophy in college.
Nice.
Probably part of the reason that this kind of conversation seemed attractive is because it's called Eternal Logos, which was an idea that we discussed at length in our philosophy program. I'm also curious, before I finish introducing myself, before I state my worldview, how does the logos function in your worldview?
Yeah. So actually, if people know, so I start off the podcast by saying this is the EPL Eternal Logos podcast. So I own a company. When I incorporated a company in 2020. In 2016, the idea is earlier than that, but I incorporated under the name Ethos, Pathos, Logos, which is the three literary terms that appeal to a person, an audience, right? So ethos being credibility, logic being logos, and pathos being the imagination, right? So I entitled the podcast Eternal Logos because, like you, I've always loved and appreciated philosophy, critical thinking, and logic and reason and all of those things. So eternal logos comes from, just the idea of being a Christian, right? That God is an internal logos, right? That there's a foundation and axiomatic principle about who God is foundationally. And so number one, it rolled off the tongue pretty cool, but also just from a appeal, the company logo and company name, and then the eternal portion sort of comes from that idea, which I think is just incredibly expansive when you think about it in a lot of different ways. So that's kind of how it's a very short version of where it comes from.
Yeah. So you've kind of intellectual fixation with the concept of logos.
100%. I'm a self-proclaimed intellectual. I'm self-proclaimed.
So it's kind of like Elon Musk with the letter X, except you probably won't name your child logos.
I don't know. Middle name.
The night is still young.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say in terms of my worldview, that is a bit of a connective tissue in terms of how I perceive reality.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I will say that I'm Christian. I adopted a Christian worldview in the year 2017 due to a variety of experiences that I had, and I became fascinated with understanding the way sophisticated minds like Aquinas, Aquinas, and also people in the respective eras that opposed Christianity, the way that they thought philosophically. And I think most notably from the Enlightenment on, when you have like people like Voltaire, or even some of the atheistic existentialist philosophers from the 1920s through the 60s and so forth, before we got fully entrenched in postmodernism, which we were sort of at the tail end of, debatably now. I don't know what we're going to call the next paradigm, but
it is interesting. Yeah, I follow. Go ahead.
But so I was in a Bible study this past week, and we talked about like what does it mean for like John 1:1, like the Word was God.
Yep.
What does that
Logos,
mean?
right?
So
Exactly,
so like what is, if you think Trinitarianly, that would mean that the God the Son, like pre-incarnate, the word Jesus would be like a human name for the figure. But God the Son is the discourse itself through which God spoke reality into existence. So the Son is the blueprint of reality, or you could say like when God said, "Let there be light," when he said that, you know how we equate light with understanding, analogically. So it was like, you see what I mean, or I was enlightened. We have a lot of these ocular centric metaphors, and that was even the case then. Whereas through God the Son, the Word was spoken, and thus intelligibility was. And if you want to get really ontological about that, I'm not sure if you've talked about ontology on your podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
If you want
being, that's right.
Being.
Study of being.
If you want to get really ontological about it, there's a paradox in even discussing this process as processual. Like I have to use the word process as a completely inadequate sequential or chronological description, just because minds grasp things. Like a concept literally means mind grasp, concept, processually. But this could not, as far as I can tell, be a process. Because how could no intelligibility be at a time? There wasn't. It's like when they have that, like here was the singularity and then the universe. It's like, where was that?
Exactly. Exactly. I've explained that to me in conversation and debates. I'm like, you don't have to just explain where matter and energy come from, but what did it expand into? Right. And so that's a concept that people it blows people's minds when they're like, that's a good point. Like, well, what is actually expanding into, right? So
yeah. So I view the teachings of, let's say, God the Son, as that blueprint of intelligibility for reality, morally, intellectually, and so forth. But I do believe to navigate that, logic does have, I mean, it's not really, to say belief is disingenuous. I know logic to have a fundamental structure through which, it's the ultimate constitutive game. And so there is a game to logic, to navigating, just like in basketball. There's a set of rules that give rise to a reality. So I was gonna ask you, because we for the audience, we were talking in the car and things started to gain momentum when we talked about the idea of is there such a thing as seeking evil or only the apparent good? And he's like, I'm gonna have to cut us off there because it's starting to
save
get
that
good.
For the podcast. Exactly.
If you don't like philosophy, it would not be considered getting good. It'd be like, oh god,
we're entering into that realm where we
but for us, I could feel it was picking up steam. But I was going to ask you, like, what, maybe even push back on one of the claims. And for additional context, so Micah gave me an overview of the purpose of the podcast. and you suggested that people don't necessarily need post-secondary training to critically think. So what do you think they need specifically to think critically? What does it mean to think critically?
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's plug your social media. Definitely want to flip that. Just want to, follow the structure here before we. So, okay. So the topic, can we state the topic in maybe like a sentence, and then we'll flip and it will be ready to go. And of course, plug your social media.
Wait, state the topic in a sentence.
Yeah. Just for clarity's sake for the audience. Yeah.
Well, what does it mean to critically think specifically? What are the rules of the game?
Yeah.
And my social media, Zach Alexzander Music on Instagram, Zach Alexzander on Facebook. Again, don't check out my TikTok. It's all the same.
And he might have did that earlier, but just to make sure because I love it though. When intros are that long, it's like perfect. This is going to be great. All right. Ceremonial flip. There we go. All right. Can you restate your question? Because I forgot it.
Did I forget it? So what are the specific rules to the game as you see it of critical thinking? You suggested when I was on the phone on the way here with you before we ripped off the Band-Aid and decided to save all of the answers for the podcast.
Yes.
You suggested that people maybe don't need training or post-secondary education to think critically. And I don't want to mix up your.
Yeah. Well, what I sort of meant is the purpose of the podcast, or one of the major purposes is, to your point, I think you mentioned postmodernism, and we're sort of in that, and maybe the tail end of that. And so in my mind, what I've seen in the world, especially through conversations and experience and those kinds of things, is people sort of losing a sense of common sense, maybe, which I think common sense is backed in sort of an idea that backed in a real reality of conscious thinking that comes from axiomatic understanding that you usually gain through experience. But I think that what undergirds that is people's ability to critical think through trial and error, right? I think there is an evolution to human development that lends itself to people thinking critically, right? And it can be thought of very, very simply, right? If I do this, X will happen, right? From a cause and effect perspective. But I think as human beings develop throughout time, right? I think an understanding of the world and the beliefs that people hold, start to contextualize that. So you get more advanced thinking, more advanced thought, those kinds of things. You eventually get civilization and books and all these different ideas. So sort of where I was leaning towards is, I think that at least from a education perspective, I think getting people to maybe at the very least, maybe saying that's like it's not necessary, or exactly forget how you phrased it, but rather getting people back in tune with the more basic principle of critical thinking, which I think is the foundation of learning, right? I think and I've said this before to like people who are teachers and things, I think if you teach people critical thinking first, all other subjects become a little easier, right? Because it's like, well, if you learn how to critical think, you start to learn, okay, if I'm learning math, I can start to critically think. And people obviously have different ways of learning, right? So if they know and understand critical thinking, basic laws of logic, which math principles follows logic, right? Logical statements, if, then, this, that kind of thing. So if you reintroduce that and teach people at the very least that it's not as complicated as some people in the postmodern era might assume that it is, right? You get rid of sort of a lazy way of thinking and just being susceptible to any postmodern idea that people might have, which people believe in this, my truth is my truth.
Let's get into what is wrong with postmodernism. First of all, because I have a preliminary sense that we might agree on what's ultimately wrong with postmodernism.
Yeah.
Would you venture to be charitable to the spirit or the thrust of postmodernism? If you were to be charitable toward it, what would you say?
I would say that I think there's value in the subjective position and experience, right? There's something true about what people go through, right? And what people think in their belief, right? I don't think that it's based on nothing necessarily, right? But I think there is a susceptibility of people just accepting things because they're told, right? And I think you can get into religious thought as well too, right? Like it's very easy to just listen to what a person says based off of an authority that they may or may not have experience with, and just accept the principle. So I think where I would be charitable is I think there is something valuable about people's experience and people's subjective positions on things. The question is well, where does that end, right? For most people, right? So I think that's probably largely where a lot of the debate comes in, where are having a conversation with somebody who may sort of fall under that postmodern paradigm. So that's kind of where I would start with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the fulcrum upon which the whole debate revolves is the question of whether there is any absolute truth.
Yep.
Or whether it is all relative. And people who are well versed in the literature of like Foucault and Derrida will know that I'm oversimplifying it a bit.
Well, how much time do we have? You know what I mean? That's
perhaps,
so much
perhaps
time.
Perhaps they're bristling at a lot more than just that so far. But to just give it a cursory overview as far as my understanding permits, postmodernism is the claim that due to the fact that every story about history or every paradigm about the way reality is colored with power dynamics and socio-political and cultural elements that serve those that are currently in, let's say, political or economic power. There's a vested interest in believing a given claim, whether economically, politically.
Yep.
I think the error is when you make a leap of logic from that. I don't know how it's possible to disagree with that. There are claims that we believe, we think for logical reasons, but we perhaps believe for social or emotional reasons. But I think to deduce from that we can now make the leap of logic, which they don't necessarily state that they're doing, but
exactly.
They are leaping from that to there is no absolute truth of any kind, because all truth contains these elements that contaminate the so-called purity of it. I think where I would stand is that to have such a naive view of truth as though it just kind of comes down from heaven outside of culture, well, that's impossible, because language is like culture. It's inextricable from culture and history. And so it's always going to be contemporaneous with, a ruling class, and there's going to be sociological dimension of it. There's going to be a political dimension to just even the language something's articulated in. Does that mean there is no truth in it? And the postmodernists would probably say, like, there's no way you can get to the bottom of it, because it's in their vested, it's kind of, to me, it's circular.
It is. Exactly.
That aspect of it is. But I didn't want to gang up on them. I wanted to first be charitable.
No worries. And I think, it was a great question you asked, because I think that does, it does set the foundation for why what's going on in our culture right now, why it's such a big divide, right? And I think fundamentally, when you kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of it, throughout history, this has been the conversation to some degree or another. Like you said, postmodernism to some degree, right? Like if you take the biblical example, right, the knowledge of good and evil, right? I think there's something fundamental about good and evil that really foundationally is about truth, right? That there is something, God is basically saying that I am the absolute truth, and you can rely and depend on me. And in some ways, human beings want to be the ones to define it for themselves, which would be the subjective position of it, one might say or might take, right? And so I think ultimately things come down to good and evil, right? To the point that you were making earlier, though, you don't think that people do things necessarily inherently because they're doing something for evil's sake, that they believe that they're doing something good and true. But,
they believe,
right?
Yeah. Or we believe.
Yeah, exactly.
We believe.
So now that we're in 2026 with the postmodern, right? It's like you said, the leap of faith there. Leap of logic. When you come to a conclusion, is well, I believe that I'm right, and I have good reason for believing that I'm right, even if you can catch me out and point out the issue in the flaw or the circularness of my argument, right? And then so you get into this back and forth, and then all of a sudden the the thing that that you have to conclude is, well, there must not be any absolute truth because that doesn't agree with what my position is, right? And so I think that's just the confusion that we're in, so to speak.
Yeah, because there can be 8 different billion opinions, no one of them is right.
Right.
I remember I was asking a family member who, to open up the can of worms of partisan politics, is very left leaning. She's Episcopalian.
Nice.
And so I think, I'll leave it at that. And and we discussed the idea of religious truth, and she wasn't willing to dismiss the validity of any other religions because people so fervently believe them, and they have for so long, and those traditions are so thoroughly established. And to her, that meant like QED, proof that there cannot be an exclusive truth in the claim of religion, because the processes to her were similar. It's revelatory. This was revealed. So whatever God is must be beyond what particular propositional truths can capture. That part I'd agree with.
Yeah.
But I don't think you need to make the first claim to agree with the second.
Yeah, exactly. How do you think, what I've found rather is, if someone makes such a claim, let's say, for instance, if people say there is no truth, right? We were just talking about the circularness of the argument, right? The question one would reasonably ask is, well, is the statement that you just made true, right?
Yeah.
It identifies and immediately points out to them that their statement contradicts logic, right?
It's self-referentially incoherent.
Exactly.
It's incoherent.
Exactly.
In reference to itself, not even appealing to
exactly.
it. There doesn't even need to be truth for it to be untrue.
Exactly. So so I always wonder what a person's response to that would be, right? And you will see them retreat from it. There'll be some, goalpost shifting, or, they'll try to make some argument that's incoherent as opposed to just being like, okay, well, that's real. And I think if you can get people to admit at that level, like, not even if they necessarily have to make any claim about, being or anything like that. It's just pointing out simply that logic works, right? In a statement, using a statement like that. If they can agree, then you go, well, if there is space, even in the conversation, in you saying that for truth, then that would be a reality to truth, right? That there seems to be something true about our universe if you can agree that that statement is contradictory in nature, right? And so with what you were saying, that your family member, like, I'm curious to how she would respond to that, or if you challenged her on the proof, right? Because you use the word proof. Let's say, well, proof exists in mathematics, right? So if you're saying that something can be proven, then you're appealing to something absolute, right, in order to prove your claim, right? So what do you think she would say to that, in your experience talking to her and with others?
I think if I did that in that moment, she would, well, it was a red Solo cup kind of occasion. It was 3 a.m.
I call that armchair philosophy.
Yeah. And I think, with all due respect, I was the one that was philosophizing, and I've learned restraint in certain people. I have to see that they're willing to play the game too. And I think she was.
That's fair.
I just wanted to know.
Yeah.
But I, for some reason, didn't pounce.
Yeah. You were asking for curiosity's sake, not for argument's sake.
Yeah. And I think, in keeping with, spoiler alert, we're going to pick on the left a little bit at some point, and that point happens to be now. We knew coming in we would at some point, but there's a lot on the right we can pick on as well. But let's start with the left.
Yes.
Someone who is currently an acolyte of the political left at the moment, I'll say this just anecdotally, is probably likely to appeal to the suffering or experience or feelings of others in the pursuit of truth when such a claim about the inherent logic of their beliefs are questioned.
Let me ask you a question before we dig into that. Do you think people on the left are pursuing truth in such a way that they would be able to make an argument that they would be able to make a claim. So, for instance, I think internally they would make that argument. But do you think that they would be able to articulate the argument to you if you ask them if they're in pursuit of truth? You know what I mean? So like you were saying, like you're appealing, you're saying that in what they're likely to do is appeal sort of to feeling, right? There's something true about my reality that if I do X and it hurts, stop doing X. There's something true about that.
Yes, there is.
But being able to articulate that in such a way to win a debate, maybe, do you think they would be able to do that well? In other words, do you think that when they think that they're pursuing truth, do you think that that's what they're doing? Or do you think that they're just going off feeling and there has to be something true about my feelings, obviously, so I'm going to stay there and not move, not budge on my, you know what I mean, my thought process or where I stand politically with any given conclusion that I might have.
Right. And I think the two archetypes you're describing are like, you know, the barista, the angry barista, where people, they see, you know, her, like, let's say it was September 11th of this past year and people ordered the Charlie Kirk, like whatever his favorite drink was, which I actually tried that.
It's a thing. It's a real thing.
Oh yeah. You just go to Starbucks and order the Charlie Kirk.
Order yourself a Charlie Kirk.
And actually, no lie, she said, we don't have that. And I was like, how do you know what I'm asking for? It's like, we don't have a drink by that name. And I was like, oh, you know, whatever his favorite drink was, you know, and I described the drink. And they made it with boiling water. Like, I got it. And I was like, and an hour later, I still couldn't drink it. So I think, so that was funny. But so I think there are, again, two different archetypes. One is the kind that is representative of the loud, emotional, bleeding heart. I took a religious studies or philosophy 101 class, and therefore, like, I am going to educate the world and kind of save it.
I think you're not a true philosopher unless you think you can do that.
Right. We have these phases, and then we slowly lose hope, and that's a sign of maturity. Yeah,
exactly. That is so true. Listen, if you've never taken a philosophy class, just engage. Go right now. If you're in college, enroll next semester. Just because it's one of the most humbling experiences you'll have. Just because you go in there really hoping for something, and you really come out knowing what you don't know. You come out understanding, like, man, I really thought I had it figured out, and now I really know that I need to go think about what I think. Right?
The Dunning-Kruger effect is just, it couldn't be more clear than when you take a philosophy class. Because what was really fun for me as the religious studies and philosophy tutor of Young Harris College, I went to this college that had about 1,500 students.
Nice. My college was also small.
North Georgia
Shout out
Mountains.
McDaniel.
Yeah. Where was yours?
McDaniel College. It's a school in Western Maryland.
How many people?
1,500 to 3,000 online presence and on campus. So liberal arts college.
Yeah,
of course.
No, but I really value that experience. Shout out to Dr. Nathan Eric Dickman. He taught me how to think. So I was a religious studies and philosophies tutor, and I had to, my job was to get these disinterested athletes and also people with special needs to pass philosophy classes. And Mr. Dickman was a fantastic professor. Like, he is absolutely incredible. Just the way that he takes us through every conceivable step of philosophizing. The number one maxim is, I don't care what you believe as much as how you got there.
That's exactly right.
The process.
Exactly right. Yep.
And getting these athletes who were, I'm Christian, they're raised Christian, but I'm constantly correcting their approach to comparative religious ethics, for instance, where we talk about Buddhism. They think they're, smarter than Nagarjuna, the 2nd century Buddhist philosopher. I believe it's 2nd century, because they arrived at the correct religious conclusion. And just spoiler alert, no one listening to this is smarter than Nagarjuna. Wow, it is. So he speaks of reality in terms of a tetralemma. If you've ever studied Hegel, you might have been familiar with that. But that's the idea of that. There's a thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and anti-synthesis. And for him, enlightenment is the anti-synthesis. It's just like, it's neither yes nor no nor both. It's almost like a reality by negation kind of paradigm.
Yeah.
But there's a humility that's studying these various traditions and views in you, and you start to get in touch with whatever the game is. I think it's hard to articulate, but I just call it the philosophy bug. You know, when you get bit by it, it's always very associated with caffeine addiction. They're just so intertwined.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's that, and then you have your Reddit atheist.
That's great.
And I'm using caricatures, and so to be fair, when we go to the right, we can use some caricatures too. Yeah. You know, like the paramilitary guys who bring their machine guns to the election.
So it's so funny because I think in some ways, right, like we said, Zach was speaking a lot of big words, and as you can see, there are a lot of big words there. But I think what's so funny about that is like throughout history, right, like there's like classical terms and classical archetypes. And then we have ours, right? So at some point, even the emojis and the funny ones we come up with, they'll use it in philosophy class. Yeah. No, but like the barista, the angry barista is an archetype, and they'll be in, philosophy books and psychology books. So we'll be great philosophers or something. Somebody on Reddit right now is going to be a great philosopher, studied for thousands of years.
Yeah, but just make sure when you sign up for the class that be prepared if you have an adjunct professor. They were probably recently a barista, so don't bring up that part. No, right.
Sorry, I keep cutting.
I think what I notice on the left is you have a lot of diversity intellectually. I think the propensity I listed, appealing to emotion, experience, oppression, historical inequities, that there's a common thread there. I think that's why they can be identified as members of the same political coalition. Yeah. But you have people who are very memeable and the emotional kind of bleeding heart types, you know, that like right-wing organizations, media companies like Turning Point USA. I mean, they built their whole social media. Yes. Like, come debate me. It's, it's not very difficult because the argument sort of implodes. There's a constant appeal to emotion. That's right. I think the tricky part is when you debate someone who's very well studied. People on the left tend to have higher levels of education. Let people who identify as left-leaning tend to have higher educational attainment on average. They have slightly higher IQs on average too. IQ is a very taboo conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you I don't know if you ever studied the Big Five and how it relates to voting habits?
No.
The Big Five personality spectra. So the two of the relevant predictors of voting habits are your degree of openness, which is very closely intertwined with IQ, general cognitive ability. People who are fixated with ideas as such tend to lean left. They tend to be high in openness. Slightly lower in conscientiousness, which subdivides into, I think, industriousness and organization. I believe.
Now that you're mentioning it, those were, yes, I'm familiar with general mental ability, and I actually did a paper. Fun fact on employee selection, and that was one of the criteria.
Oh, really?
We can talk about that later, but go ahead.
That's cool.
It's interesting,
So people who are left-leaning tend to be higher in openness, and this is where my own existence is so paradoxical as a musician and a songwriter, but also someone who's studied philosophy, and I tend to have the angel and devil of each of those within me, but they tend to be lower in conscientiousness, so they may not, this sounds harsh, but they may not work as hard in terms of what we call grit. I can hear people typing. Like, no.
Comment.
But mandatory. Please do argue with me. I'll definitely respond on my next off day. I've got an 8-month-old, so I'm a little busy, but I'll find time.
That's right, and a father.
Yeah, I am a father. Yeah, it softened me up a bit, but not. I'll never turn down a Reddit
too much.
Atheist. You could come to my door, and I'll have you come in. I'll serve you coffee too. We'll hash it out.
And charitable, hospitable, charitable father.
Yeah, I'm going to give you caffeine to get so you will steel man yourself. You'll be able to represent yourself. So I think that kind of person will come up with varyingly robust responses to the charge that I laid to my family member. But it will still revolve around maybe more of a probabilistic argument. Like, how could there be one true religion? What are the odds that out of the 6,000 religions or so, the debated number, that Christianity, for instance, is the true one? And what do we mean by true?
Right.
Which is funny. Culturally and in contemporary discourse, the conversation stops there.
Yeah.
People are very surprised if you say, okay, well, there are responses to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
because we're used to conversing on such a low level.
Exactly. You can't go down the layers.
Yeah, we're not exercising the muscles of discourse when it's uncomfortable as much.
Yeah.
Because I can only speak for the era in which I was born, but the silo of social media has become even more curated. To the point where, like, I'm only seeing things I agree with. I feel this like lack of tension, this mental atrophy. I was almost worried coming to this podcast. I'm like, am I even, because it blunts you, it does slow down your ability to assess opposing arguments. And I think ultimately that's the ultimate misfortune.
Yeah, I think for me, that's why I encouraging commenting so much, right? That's why I say commenting's mandatory, right? Liking a subscription, right? This podcast wasn't built with the idea to make $1 million overnight being some social media influencer. It's designed around the idea that I'm actually interested in being true, right? Like I want to be as true as I possibly can be, right? Which I'm gonna go maybe a number of different places, which I think is one of the reasons that I believe Christianity is true, because Christianity throws out this interesting idea that the truth is important, right? That, like they, and the disciples say, if we're not telling the truth, then everything's in vain, right? That kind of idea, there's an undercurrent there where they're basically saying, challenge us. Like, we're interested in being challenged, right? Jesus's physical resurrection is a challenge to the reality that bodies don't normally get up, right? So I think that is so important, what you're saying, and I think it's just the thing that I think undergirds everything that I'm hoping to accomplish with this podcast, because the reason that we've lost that ability to converse for whatever reason, technologically, there's 100 reasons why people don't engage the way that they used to. I think partly it's lazy, right? Thought, like people just find it exhausting to go down those deep layers, because it's like people have a position. It's like, well, if there's no absolute truth, there's no point in trying to go down the layers to find and excavate if there is the truth there to be found in the first place. I think people, reading is a lost art, right? And I think reading encourage people to just, be in a moment, be patient, take your time through a book, understand, comprehend, interpret correctly. I could talk ad infinitum about that and sort of some of the thoughts that I have there, but
really? About interpretation?
Yeah, about interpretation.
Really? What would you say?
I think, what I say hermeneutics? Is, my to put it simply, I think there's levels. I think people, especially when it comes to, we can kind of keep it on topic here. When you're talking, reading religious texts, if you're reading the Bible, right? A lot of people make an argument about the issue of interpretation, right? Like, it's very easy to misinterpret the Bible, but I try to go down to more fundamental, start more at a much lower level, right? Like, are you reading the words as intended by the author, right? So there's reading, there's comprehension, and then there's interpretation. I think people have a reading issue, and I think people oftentimes can't get past the comprehension step, right? To even begin to interpret something correctly, right? You got to be able to comprehend before you can interpret correctly. And obviously there's context. Context is king, especially when you're reading literature. And so people find it lazy to have to go through doing all that in order to reach a conclusion. They prefer rather to just get some feeling. Does it make me feel good? Then it must be true. And they start with that presumption. So when they get into conversations, they often find themselves losing because they don't know how to go down the layers, because they're lazy in their thought. So again, it's probably this a very cyclical, vicious circle of failure on their part in that sense, right? So yeah, I say all to say that's why I encourage commenting so much, because it gives me an opportunity to see if someone out there has a different position or opinion. I want to engage with that, because I want to know if my opinion is worth having, right? If I think I'm saying something true about something. And so that's the only way you can do it, is bounce ideas off of other people, right? Is to engage with, obviously there's some engagement with, the objective reality that we find ourselves in, right? But then there's obviously different thoughts, opinions, experiences, culture, all kinds of things that come into play. And so, yeah, I'm just you were saying a lot of stuff, and there was some other stuff you said I had to comment on that for sure because that was great. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for elaborating on the interpretation piece. I took a course called hermeneutics. Hermes is the I think it's god of messaging.
Yes. Yes.
But I think also the god of confusion. In that class, that was the better analogy.
So you have the most interesting and fun arguments for sure.
That class was a tour de force for sure. It was also headed by Mr. Dickman. Dr. Dickman.
Nice.
You ever seen the Max Butterfield, the guy who gives dating advice?
Yes.
Yeah. Max Butterfield here, doctor.
Doctor, man. He's hilarious. It's so catchy. We could talk about that too.
It's extremely the way he looks right into the camera.
You expect that. Mm-hmm. Finish the thought you were going about the left, because I think it's really bringing some things to the surface here. I think that it might be really good for the audience to engage with.
Yeah, and so I think to paint with a broad brush, the left refers to a conglomeration of philosophies and cultural movements that are pushing back against ruling classes that have instrumentalized the idea of objective reality in oppressive ways. There's a nobility to that quest.
Yep, 100%. Jordan Peterson, if you ever see this podcast, you were talking about this, I forget when, on one of the podcasts or something you were going on, and it reminded me of what he was talking about, where there's a nobility in that, in the challenge of tyranny, which can rise from authority, right? Positions of authority, which oftentimes come from very, very traditional viewpoints, right? Or, we've learned this is the way that it is. There's no way to challenge it, but you need someone who's a bit of a rebel to come and challenge it, and bring down those strongholds that will keep people, or ultimately that traditional viewpoint turning into tyranny will eventually oppress, right? And hold back the free thought of ideas, and those kinds of things, which obviously gets a little bit political, right? Because there's the conservative, for instance, tends to say that they stand for free speech, that kind of thing, right? So you get this really interesting things that come in from all these different variables. But you mentioned that just reminded me of something Jordan Peterson was talking about when you talk about these different, paradigms that kind of rise or have evolved over time, and you see the rise and fall of societies based on these same ideas, right? And so, yeah.
No, the societies certainly do rise and fall on the basis of these ideas, and we can probably all feel a very serious tension at this moment in time. The extent to which that is real beyond our feelings is debatable, because people often suggest that we've never been this divided, which is not true.
That's not true. Yeah, that's for sure.
There were even times in the 20s and 30s, the presidential debates, if you go back and read some of those transcripts, they make Donald Trump look like it's like a Chuck E. Cheese party. There's
hilarious.
Like the country's going to fall. Like Andrew Jackson, just look up some of his his campaign propaganda. It's why not? Yeah,
to your point though, I think, and this is part of the issue is it's what's interesting about today is that we live in the information age, right? You have information literally at your fingertips. You can Google anything, and regardless of if you're looking up something, the source and all of that kind of thing, and whether it's true or not. The point is it seems that the entire world and the information and history of the world is at our fingertips to some degree. But we find ourselves lazy in exploring the information that's available, which is interesting, I think, right? Like, back in the past when, it was, the Greeks would spend hours and days and months and years philosophizing, trying to pursue truth, reality, thinking, and all those different things, without access to information the way that we have it today. When we have access to the information, we don't utilize it, right? And so I think if people knew that, right, if people weren't lazy in approach, if they knew, okay, well, the history, of the world is this, right? These different things that we find ourselves fighting over are repeated, right? That there are worse times in history. I wonder how that would change people's perceptions and how people engage and interacted with one another, right? I think one of the things that's kind of has become more taboo is debate. Like people don't know what arguments are, right? People think that arguments are when people get passionate and yell, but that's not the definition of argument, right? And so I think if people understood and had a little bit more appreciation for information, availability of information, looking things up, you know what I mean? And when I say look things up, everybody,
do your own research.
Dude, like what any conversation you get into, everybody's looked up a study, right? Like everybody has statistics and data to back up their point. So I get it. It requires a little more work to sift through the information because you have to figure out, okay, well, what part of this is true or not. But that's where critical thinking and other things come into play, which, again, to your point, people aren't flexing that muscle anymore. Mm-hmm. So people don't get the skeptic, sort of light bulb when they read something like, well, hang on, wait a minute. What's the limitations of this study? I always tell people, read the limitations section.
Read the methodology.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Don't just read the conclusions to support your argument or support the position that you hold or the conclusion that you've drawn. Right?
Yeah. So, another great, if you're developing the rudiments and basics of critical thinking, another thing to do, I always need to remind myself to do, is to straw man one's own position and steel man the other position.
That's right.
It won't make you seem overly sure of yourself, and perhaps that's a good thing.
Yep. Yeah. Speaking towards balance. Yeah. What do you think? You asked me. Let me return the question. When it comes to the left in making these arguments, how would you best steel man their position in such a way that you feel like they would be happy with, right?
I don't know if I could do the second part. I'm not sure that they could be happy beyond a certain point.
Yeah,
if they share this paradigm, but in a way that they would find where they might not call us Nazis. That's still tough. No, just depends on what corner of the internet you're on. I would say that I would continue on the path I'd chartered initially, that it refers to the left broadly, refers to a series of post-Enlightenment, largely postmodern in some cases. There's a lot of diversity intellectually on the left, postmodern, Marxist, a lot of different causes that really reject the idea of being under a blanket ideology, but like say feminist or feminism, first wave, second wave, etc. People tend to identify on the basis of the cause they're chiefly concerned about.
That's right.
I would say life is extremely unfair. There is an element of life that is unacceptable to our emotional apparatus. There is a surplus of suffering that's incomprehensible, especially to someone from a first world country. And inequality is seemingly ineradicable, and therefore the government or some powerful entity must intervene to make life a bit more fair.
Yeah. I
feel that position, perhaps we'd have to see. Comment if you're a leftist.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think you're right. Like this is going to be a controversial statement. I'm not saying that I believe in this necessarily, but I think there's something about it that's true. There's certain words and certain things that get rise from people, despite if you try to explain it intellectually, right? So sometimes before I get into a discussion with somebody, I'll say like, I'm not making an emotional appeal, right? In other words, I'm trying to say, hold back your emotional response to what I'm about to say and try to engage with the thought, right? In preparation. Oftentimes it doesn't work. but I try anyway. So I think one of the most efficient forms of government is dictatorship, right?
Efficient.
Yes, it's efficient, right? It's if you have one person calling the shots, things get done quickly, right? The issue obviously is the person and the power dynamic. When people get too much power, corrupts, right? The good book says ultimate power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. So I think that is, to your point, someone has to step in, right? Like we hope that the person that steps in is a benevolent, good, understanding, wise individual that has compassion and all of these other things. But the world that we find ourselves in, like you said, is not fair. And so the issue, I think, with people who are in positions of government, the power of the president in the United States as the commander in chief oftentimes finds themselves having to make decisions where someone's not going to be happy, right? If you ever question whether life was fair or not, just think about that, right? If you're you don't even think that high of a level for a manager, right? And you have a job to do. Every decision you make isn't always going to be acceptable by everybody who is under your leadership. And so that's the unfortunate bit. So I agree with, what you said about someone having to step in, right? And what I find the issue with the left may oftentimes have is I think that the left tends to try to play hero, right? Like I always say this. I'm like, if we're all human beings and we're all flawed, then I think at the very base, we ought to all be humble, especially in our approach to how we think we are capable of solving problems and issues, right? I think if you have the fundamental understanding of what I was saying about like being in a position of leadership or having to make decisions, a good leader, I think has to chase wisdom because it's very, very difficult. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? And so I think if the left, and this may be charitable to the left, came to that realization, I think their approach would be better. I think they would see better results, and I think they would see results more quickly, right? But when people are emotional and they're overly passionate about things, oftentimes wisdom gets thrown out the window. And so I think that's truly the mistake. But it's just this hero thing. It's just like, let me go be the one to save this person over here, regardless of what the situation might be. Very oftentimes you see some wrongdoing, you just go in a call into action, regardless of thinking about the situation dynamic or what's going on. But yeah. So it's like you're playing hero a little too much. It seems like you don't understand that life isn't fair, right?
Yeah.
And you're not willing to accept that as a principle of the universe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I wonder how that benevolent instinct, when it matures in light of certain irrefutable facts like that, how it would be channeled so much more effectively to actually help people.
Exactly.
There was a very tragic moment that I predicted to a T in my family. So my little sister has such an amazing heart, and she baked 20 pieces of chicken with like delicious macaroni and cheese and like sides, and bought these trays to put them in. I was living in Midtown Atlanta, so I knew exactly what was going to happen when we tried to do this. But she wanted to give out all 20 of these meals to homeless individuals. And so, long story short, in 2 hours, we were unable to give out more than 9, I believe. Yeah, they did not want the food.
Yep.
And of course, people can quibble with my sample size. Our sample size was extensive. We made lots of stops that were very brief. Yeah. Because, even given the fact that I'm 245 pounds, I wasn't exceedingly comfortable in some of the situations we were in. Yep. But she had this crushing realization that lack of resources and opportunities were not necessarily in all ways the chief reason why they were in that position. Yeah. There's a self-infliction involved there, potentially. Yep. I think where the left fundamentally loses its appeal and lost its appeal in the most recent election is the lack of an individual accountability that it produces.
That's right.
I think if this philosophy was more connected to ideas of self-improvement, self-betterment, and accountability, moral accountability,
100%.
it would have no problem winning elections. Not that that's necessarily of importance to me personally.
Yep.
Well, we have businesses, so maybe it is. I don't know. But speaking in terms of preference, I would prefer to see the left engage, for people to be able to hold and espouse what brings them to that worldview, to keep that, not necessarily take the red pill and just fully adopt whatever is mainstream on the other side. Like I did for a period. And then I came back over toward the center again recently. But there are certain truths of life that, as you suggested at the beginning when we asked about the logos, that life isn't fair. How could you argue against it? It simply isn't. So in light of the fact that you won't save everyone, and that your help and interference could actually make their own life worse and yours.
That's right.
How will you help now?
Right.
Who will you choose to help, and what will you do? That it requires discernment. And like you suggested, wisdom is this ethereal thing, but it is an unequivocally good thing to have, because it's knowledge that applies. It's not only the knowledge to act appropriately, but to apply it instantaneously in a moving, dynamic, and fluid situation that with which you may not be familiar. So that's where I think the left, that's part of the reason why it includes a much younger demographic. And you mentioned the idea of a savior complex. That's actually almost verbatim in this kind of Piagetian idea of development. I don't want to misspeak. It's been a while since I've been in the books for my sake, studying my theoretical psych. But there is a phase theorized in that school of thought. I believe the age range is around 16 to 24, in which the world's problems are voluntarily adopted, and there's this burning desire to solve them on one's own. And when other individuals suggest that you will exit that phase soon, that is seen as apathy or cynicism rather than wisdom. And that's why that perspective is so unwise. Because it's deeming wisdom.
It leads to, that's interesting. Wow, that's a great. I would have 100%. I was going to, literally when you said that, I was going to say, do you think before 16, right, it's sort of the information gathering stage, right? And you get to your 16, you're becoming you're an adult into 18, 24, and then, like you said, if the world has put so much pressure on you, right, and has rejected all of your ideas, positions, and opinions, then it turns to, in my mind, I was just like, well, that's why people tend to get wired, especially when they're 30, right? You accept something that you couldn't accept before, because it's like, well, you just, there's only so many times you can run into a brick wall before you recognize, like, that's probably not going to move. You know what I mean? And so, but it's interesting that you took the other approach, in your study with this, where you said it can come and become cynicism, which is dangerous, because then you start, you think running into the brick wall is like, you see it differently. It's no longer wisdom. It's something else. It's like dangerous. So that's cool. I never thought about it that way. That's awesome.
It's just as I see it, this, when people ask like, what would you say to your younger self? I mean, no one really asked me that. I'm not famous.
Well, let's ask him right now.
When my
what would you say?
No, like my younger sister, when we occasionally have these kinds of discussions, or my wife, there's nothing I could say. I'd give him a hug. I'd try to show him what I've done or accomplished and not accomplished, and what that meant. But at the end of the day, the hug is the only thing that'll communicate. Like, there is a chasm of difference between you and I, myself, talking to my younger self, and time is the only way to get there. That's wise. Like the story about Moses tending the cattle for 40 years. He became the meekest man in the world.
Yes.
Because he did this repetitious task over and over and over and over. You became gentle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
I think that's so cool. Like one of the thoughts that I had when you were going through that was it's human beings are interesting because we experience the world in so many different ways, right? There's just so many dimensions to the human experience. There is the pursuit of intelligence. You know what I mean? There is wisdom, which you oftentimes gain through experience, but there's something about wisdom that you acquire through being humble, right? The Bible says that, wisdom begins with the fear of God, right? And then you have the moral dynamic, right? We were talking about the left and the hero complex, and there's something that calls out to us as human beings that gives us the belief that we feel like we can have an impact. And then there's the realization of the environment in the world that we find ourselves in, i.e., we would call that in the Bible the fall, right? That's a real problem, right? And so you have to engage with those four things just to start, right? And so your experience living on Earth is a journey, bouncing and vacillating between all of those things. And I think, when it comes to the left, when it comes to politics, I think it is, and that's why we call it like far left, alt right, right? I think it's when you become too extreme on one and you don't have enough probably wisdom to recognize that you're too extreme. And that's when real issues and problems tend to arise in your personal life and in your community. And then eventually you find the philosophy that you stand on crumbles, right? Because it's a divided house, so to speak.
Which
right?
is a good thing, by the way.
Yeah.
If your philosophy does not work and it crumbles, that's a good thing.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. What's great about Christianity is your life can crumble, but the faith will never crumble per se. Right. Your personal faith could, but if you live in error or what is referred to religiously as sin, and you lose your house, you lose your wife, that is implicit in what Christianity tells you will occur or will likely occur. Yeah. And that would be a good thing. Yeah. That would be a good thing. That would be a just. Exactly. That would be a just event or series of unfortunate events. Yeah. But let's pick on the right for a second. All I will say where I think in this critical age of roughly 24 onward to 30, I mean, when you start paying your taxes, that's
greater reality than that.
Yeah, that's
like when you start making real money.
Is this taxes. Are these social programs like, really working? I'm
becoming a Republican. Like we need to figure this out. This is crazy.
Yeah, we do.
That's not picking on the right. We're going to, all right. Go ahead.
No, that is, so just to comment on that, I think what happens often is you realize that the naive ideological package that the left offers younger people, by naive, I mean just wholly inadequate to certain unfortunate realities about helping others, about organizing societies, and about the fact that a utopic society should never be our vision in any way. Like that has been attempted, and we should gaze upon those examples. Yeah. I think what happens often with conservatives is this is I think why they're so maybe we. I don't feel like that moniker necessarily fully applies to me, but I have some conservative beliefs. Yep. Conservatives deaden our conscience to these realities because they are emotionally overwhelming and we have more access to them than ever. And we didn't evolve with the neurocircuitry to handle the load of the realization of all of the suffering in the world. Yeah. And this isn't a particularly profound or deep insight, but it is too much. And so let me just take care of mine, accumulate wealth, etc. Some shallow goal. That is, as a father of one, husband, musician, where, to be a musician, you need to be extremely driven to lead a family. And it's about the bag. There's nothing wrong with that view. Yeah. That is a shallow view of the world. That's not an impressive life. That's what most people do. They provide for their family. That is a beautiful thing, I will say. But that is not an impressive place to stop. Yeah. I won't be pleased with myself looking upon my life at age 85 or whenever I kick the bucket, I won't be pleased with that. And I think God will show me that I abrogated most of my potential, if that is how I end up, because that's standard, that it's unethical to fall below that in my worldview, to fall below that standard.
Yeah.
What more can be done? What more potential can be actuated,
Right.
in terms of being an exemplar for your community, helping people, but not serving ideologies that do ultimately oppose the tenets that we hold as Christians, about, say, life, the right to life, and the nature of well, I don't know if we want to get into the trans topic. I'll maybe avoid it, because I do have friends in that movement, and I don't have any hard or fast stance. I more prefer to listen. But
part two. We can always do a part two.
There we go. Yeah. But it is very important to strike a balance, and that's why there's an advantage to believing that truth is a person, not merely a series of propositions.
That's right.
But the ultimate reality has an anthropomorphic or subjective nature. Like God, you can have the experience of encountering God. God is tender. God is loving and merciful and compassionate, and you can experience that.
Yeah.
Everything about what is prototypically considered feminine is in God's nature, in our belief. And as we've the discussion of logic has, for obvious reasons, dominated the amount of time we've been discussing. But God also has these attributes that people on the left are searching for. The fulfillment of justice and emotional things, making emotional sense.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think when one wanders too far into the conservative camp, there's an apathy about that. That I find to be inadequate as a finishing point. I think it is another mark in the progression, depending on where you started ideologically and how you got to, let's say, certain conservative realizations. And I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. Some people are raised conservative and then they become liberal. I would be interested to know what they become after that, or what happens after that. There's just so much variance. But
what do you think? What do you think the right or conservatives miss about the truth? It sounded like you were saying something about the pursuit of justice and those intangible things, right? There is something about that is obviously not necessarily the methods or the measures that you might use in order to obtain those things may found themselves in something logical, right? But there's something about the heart of that is not necessarily logical, or at the very least, when we try to think about it, it hurts our brains to some degree, right? Like it's like if you ask somebody to define love, it's just like I really couldn't do that well, but that's why I think what you said about the truth being a person.
To will the good of another is
right.
Love. Aquinas would say.
Yeah. So, and there's so many different ways of looking at it and defining it, right? And that's kind of what I mean when I say it kind of hurts our brain in a way, not necessarily literally, but the thought escapes us, right? It's not just necessarily math, right? And so what do you think conservatives get wrong about the truth, right? Because if there's validity to the left, validity to the right, and truth is, like you said, maybe you call it a person, which I agree with. What do you think the right gets wrong, or conservatives get wrong about that?
Well, I think each ideological package has a set of various causes, and many of those causes aren't as cut and dry. In fact, most of them aren't as cut and dry as like this is propositionally, indefatigably, irrefutably true by logical deduction. I think the only things that can be deduced to be true are things like mathematical facts, the laws of logic, and things that follow from those laws. So it can be deduced to be true. And of course, things can be proven true provisionally through inductive reasoning, but that assumes that reality is real, which I think beyond a reasonable doubt we can do. But that's a provisional truth. So like scientific truths about the speed of light. It's like, seems probably that there is a set speed that like it. So for now, let's just stick with that. And there's good reasons to think that. But it's not this eternal absolute fact in the way that a deductive proof is. So I think there are various causes that I wouldn't necessarily fully agree with in terms of the right. What I think the right gets very consistently wrong, not in the propositional sense, but in the emotional sense, is that truth, all in all, the conversation revolving around the word truth should never be discussed ultimately as extricable from love or the emotional dimension of reality. So Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher, theologian, considered the father of existentialism. He was reacting against this overly systematic Enlightenment approach to philosophy with Kant and then Hegel. And he was saying that this is just, reality involves the collision of polar opposites, logic and emotion. So a self is someone who takes responsibility for that collision. And the authentic self is someone who synthesizes that moment by moment. They don't defer to a series of principles or logical assertions. I'm trying to remember the formal names of the stages. The first stage is someone who deals in particulars, like they seek truth through anecdotes. We know that's a lower level of perceiving truth because there's too much variant. You're not finding what is invariant among all the variants.
Right.
So those individual propositions, there's an infinite number of them. But he's worried about what is the meaning of your life? What should you do? And when you defer to, like conservatives often do, defer to traditional programming, yes, these traditions might be efficacious and they might broadly work, but you're abrogating the tension that is truly there and letting the programming just make the choice. So it's like a good example. So you have a paper due at midnight of like 2 weeks from now, and it is 3 hours till midnight. Who's going to write the paper? The fact of the matter is the deadline is going to write the paper.
Right.
The deadline is going to play a bigger role in influencing the content and quality of the paper than you.
Person. Right.
Yeah. So that is not taking responsibility. That's an example of letting the collision itself play out. The self is someone that actually deals with. And so the word he uses for that freedom, the dizziness of the freedom of enduring and navigating those collisions, is anxiety. There's a book called The Concept of Anxiety by Kierkegaard. It's a rough read because it's translated directly from Danish. It's a rough read. It's weird English, but I would highly recommend it. Gets good immediately. It's just caffeine, highly recommended. And so I think on the one hand, you have the pole of emotionality. On the other hand, you have the pole of logic. The maturity is this ongoing realization that they're always colliding, almost always. So synthesize the two. Sometimes Ecclesiastes is often, not always, but often a good manual for certain situations. I think it's Ecclesiastes 3, right? There's a time for mourning, a time for dancing. There's certain time where one pole ought to set the tone. And conservatives are often tone deaf. There's a reason why conservatives are often blind to art and the profundity of poetry and music. It's just extremely cut and dry. There are temperamental, psychological, and even biological reasons for that, which we could get into maybe in part 2. But I think that is an error, or to put it a bit more charitably, you could do better. If you're conservative, there's more to life than providing for your family and abiding by traditions. There's an adventure for you to embark on, and in my belief, God created you to discover that in whatever you know in your bones.
Yeah.
Synthesize that with wisdom and let that play out. Take responsibility and accountability.
Yep.
Life is not fair. There are systems in place that are against people to varying degrees. But part of the issue existentially with the left is they don't even have that discussion. The system plays a determining role in the success or failure of people, which is just observably false. It plays an incredibly influential role. And some people, it's almost a determining role.
Yeah.
You know, like if you grow up in a neighborhood where no one reads and you're just worried about not getting stabbed or what your next meal is. You don't even have a model for certain behaviors that generate success or mobility in the world. In being able to value the right things is a privilege because you have models that you can appeal to and then work toward. But if you have no North Star, no telos, then what do you do? I do recognize that's not, I can't understate. I mean, I can't overstate the importance of that. But the issue is that if you appeal to your emotions and you see situations like that, you might make the intellectual mistake of saying that plays a determining role.
Yeah. Incredibly profound. Let me say that. And thank you for that explanation. There were a lot of thoughts that went through my mind on that. I think the way I would I agree, right? What I would kind of say about that is, in partly, there's oftentimes things in your life that you experience or that you hear and you're reminded of, and that will help to strengthen the position you hold, right? And so oftentimes, you know, when you hear me say, like, this is why I'm a Christian, that's kind of what I mean to say in short term, is that the Bible does this incredible job of explaining what you said consistently and constantly, right? What I mean by that is, I think, to answer the question, sort of what I think the right gets wrong about the truth, right, is that if you take, so for instance, the story of the Old Testament and God delivering and giving the law to the Israelites, you might say that the tradition falls more in the law itself, right? This is the staple. This is the way it is. Move forward with that understanding and act accordingly, right? So when you're met with issues and problems, we don't have to really give much thought to it, right? But people oftentimes forget in the Old Testament that what God always contextualizes the law with is, remember that I delivered you from bondage, right?
Yes.
Which is the grace. And so the issue that the right has is they forget the grace.
Thank you.
It perfectly points out that paradigm, right, where you're looking at a people, and it's very easy to fall on a tradition because it's easy, right? We were talking about the laziness of people not wanting to do the research and look into the information or give thought to the deeper meaning, right? It also is almost exactly the same on the other side, where it's like you don't want to give thought to what it would mean to challenge your traditions, right? Because you're so comfortable with them. And so I think, that's consistent throughout the Bible. And I think God is consistently and constantly trying to get people, particularly in the Old Testament, to remember the grace, to remember that, like, God is the example to follow, right? If you look to God first and you contextualize the law through God, which is what Jesus does perfectly when he reaches the scene, right? You have the perfect model to live your life by. But that doesn't necessarily mean, left, that you can forget that life is unfair because we find ourselves in a fallen universe. So also remember to pick up your own cross and take accountability that way. And so it's just really interesting. Like, I think the reason why I'm a Christian is that no matter what philosophy you go down, no matter how often you might study a different philosopher, they come to these conclusions. And like you said, like, truth is a person. You get to the person of Jesus, right? And back to JP, I think JP Jordan Peterson makes this point constantly, right? Which is why he says, people are like, well, he's not a Christian. He hasn't professed Christianity, but he defends Christianity because I think he recognizes the reality of this, that Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords for that reason, because all things can be found in him in his display when he walked the earth, right? In his teachings and all of that, right? And so it's just incredible. Like from my perspective, that's kind of how I will think about it.
I've never said JP, so I'll say Jordan Peterson. He and I are tight, like
exactly. I call him once a week.
He appeals to this Jungian idea of the archetype of Christ. So the psychological archetype of Christ is, if someone is the King of Kings, then if you take what is most kingly about all of the best kings, that is personified in Christ. What is most noble, what is most righteous. The quote unquote essence would just be the extrapolation of all of the best, what is best about all of the best. And it was interesting that you emphasized grace in the Old Testament. I think that's a point that needs to be made over and over, is that we underemphasize the extent to which God is gracious, depicted as gracious and merciful and kind in the Old Testament. We underemphasize the extent to which Jesus is judgmental in the New Testament.
100%.
He was not a pacifist.
Exactly.
The concept of judgment is one that I'm always eager to discuss with, particularly with leftists. It's not a sign of maturity not to judge others. That's not a sign of wisdom.
That's right.
It's not a sign. It's not what Jesus taught. What he taught was not to condemn others. Because condemnation supposes a godlike omniscience about the factors that influence the actions of an individual.
That you couldn't possibly know.
We could not possibly know. And we would just simply be that person if all the conditions were rendered equal, And so the arrogance of that is what Jesus cautions against. But to judge others, we can judge action. We can. So it's funny. I had a conversation. My dad laughed because he was just so unfamiliar with this idea. He's like, "And I never judge." I was like, "I do."
Yeah, me too. I'm like,
I should be judged too. Like I should. That's fine.
And it goes to me too. That's
there's nothing wrong with being judged. In my opinion, it doesn't. There's nothing I'm clinging on to so fiercely that the words of another person or the evaluation of another person I'm simply going to read it. If this was a month ago before I delete it, it would be on Threads. For my psychological health, I had to delete that. But you read it and assess whether there is a kernel of constructive truth in that. And that's, if you're married, you already know all about this, because that's your everyday life.
Which I heard someone say that marriage is actually one of the ways that God sanctifies. That's right.
I'll just bring it more close to home. I'll confirm that for you. And it's a beautiful thing because you're softened up. So that and having a baby, I have my daughter Alessia is going to be 8 months on February 8th.
Nice.
So
awesome.
at the time of this podcast was the 29th of January, 2026. And that has been a fascinating journey into understanding human development and how rapidly we grow. Of course, a baby's growth is so much more rapid compared to where they were in their capacity, and only a short amount of time later, they're doing things they could have never comprehended. But everyone I heard an expression, I can't remember where I heard this, but everyone's a big baby. It's like, I'm looking at this child, and at some point in time, the only variable that will really change fundamentally is the time that has passed since that phase. This person could be flicking someone off at a bus station. They were once a precious child, and in some sense they still are. And that has caused me to look at the world with more empathy. That I don't know that I'm fully softened up. There's certain moments where I'm like, oh no, I'm not going. There's a limit on that. But everyone was at one point a baby and was completely vulnerable in that way. And to some extent, they still are. And so that's been very transformative in that way.
It takes wisdom to recognize that, though, right? Because if someone challenges us, I think when people have their actions challenged, I think they inherently feel attacked, right? Because they feel like that this is a fundamental belief. If you compromise that belief, it'll compromise my health and my well-being and who I am. right? And I think it takes a wise
Trigger.
person to that's exactly right. It takes a wise person to recognize, no, that doesn't have to be true, right? Like you said, I can listen to it, read it, hear it, and take and extrapolate what's true about that thing, and then take it on to myself and have it make me into a better person, somebody who will actually be what I hope internally I claim to be, right? And not be too closed off and, those kinds of things. Yeah, man, like there's so many more things and so many more ways we can go.
Oh, are you wrapping this up now on that note?
Well, I, of course, give you the last word. I will say this, the something that you mentioned, I think just the nature of, thank you for this conversation, because I think it does highlight, we talk about right, left, red, blue, conservative, liberal. I think it highlights the importance of the human experience and understanding where people sit based on their experiences, but also gives people a reason to challenge themselves in the way that they think. So it really exemplifies, what I hope to accomplish with this podcast. In one way, shape, or form, and I try to use whatever topic that people want to discuss to try to highlight that, right? Because I think there's validity on both sides, and I think to be charitable to both sides is just a good way of, it's just a good way to be, in my opinion, right? And so, like I said, we could go for probably 100 more hours. I'm gonna definitely say part 2 is on the way. I say that all the time, but I promise you they are coming because these are just such fruitful discussions. That it's just, you just have to have another part to it. Definitely get the last word. I know you could see when he said we're going to cut it off there. He's sad because podcasting is great. It's so fun. And it's so
going back to family life.
Yeah, exactly. But I definitely don't want to take up all your time and all your night and that
likewise,
kind of thing too. So get the last word, and then we'll wrap it up. And then, like I said, part 2 is coming. So the last word.
So I would say to borrow from your point that we're always projecting our biases onto things. It's not inherently bad to have a bias or unreasonable. It's just a fact of the structure of our comprehension. So a good source, if you're feeling very ambitious in terms of your intelligence to read, because I could have never comprehended this stuff without being walked through. And I mean, like, I was crawling. I mean, every page I had to put an ice pack on my forehead. But this is, I think it's called Interpretation Theory by Paul Ricoeur. There's a hermeneutical philosopher and Gadamer. They both converge on the idea that comprehension interpretation has a structure. If you ever want to learn anything, you're always going to be very ignorant at the start. And not only will you not know, not only will your mind won't be this empty vat willing to be informed. It'll actually be almost like a snow globe that's agitated. You'll constantly be shooting thoughts upon the text. That's okay. That's normal. That's to be embraced. Something I'm noticing a lot nowadays is that people are stupidly skeptical. And
that's right. Yeah.
That's okay, as long as you don't stop there, because your skepticism will be very unrefined at first, in all likelihood.
Yeah,
and that's okay too, But continue to be skeptical of your skepticism, and you'll be onto something. There is likely an association between the word "no" and intelligence, but that is also. That one should also be skeptical of the application of that. I would just say if you want to read philosophy, please comment and we can get you pointed in the right direction. There are lots of different eras. It's a very enriching hobby practice for any area of life. And I would say don't be intimidated by it. It's comprehension is a process.
Yeah,
it's good to have biases and to be very passionate and energetic, because that will give you a starting point and that will give you the zeal to continue, and you'll be corrected periodically, and whether or not you accept that is your own prerogative.
Yeah.
But it will be most fruitful if you ride that energy and continue to learn on the basis of that,
Yeah.
of being so sure that you're right
Exactly.
and being so wrong, and having that epiphany over and over and over again. And that's glorious. I think, that's a great, that's why these kind of conversations are fun, because it's not, the paradigm of dialogue is not victory. It's a game. So anyways, enjoyed it.
Thanks, you so much, man.
Yeah, man.
Dude, like
Appreciate
I said,
you.
we'll have you back on the podcast 100 times. I've always we'll eventually have more people here, and we can. If you have a favorite podcast, you want 2 people you've seen on the podcast, let us know. We'll try to get them in the studio together so we can continue to have these incredible and fruitful conversations. Like I said, as you can see, this man is very smart. He's very thoughtful. He's a father, a loving father. And so it's just so cool to hear people's thoughts as always. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully you're having a great start of the year. Like I always say, commenting, it's mandatory. Liking, subscription is optional. Come on back for the next one. We'll make sure we get this guy back on the podcast. And of course, make sure you go follow his social media, engage with him, shoot him a message, DM him, slide into them DMs, ask him for them book recommendations, and pick his brain. So also want to support him and everything he's doing with his music and all that. So make sure you follow and all of that stuff for him too. So thank you again, man. Appreciate you guys into this episode, but the eternal never ends.